Hey everyone, I'd like to share with you today my Blight encounter farming strat in 3.25 Phrecia. First off, let me show you the idle setup that I'm running. I'm using increased effect of explicit modifiers on your maps, on Conquer idols and 1x3 idols. And I think those are pretty important. Everyone's using them this league, and not just for Rogue Exiles, but other various strats. Juicing your maps like this is just way too good. And on top of that, I'm also using a modifier which increases the spawn rate of, well, not increases, but gives flat more spawn rate of non-unique monsters on the 1x3 idols, which juices up the density of the Blight encounter. Other important modifiers that I'm using include quantity on the Conqueror idols and the 1x3 idols as well. They pretty nice to have, but obviously not mandatory, but that's what I have right now. That's what I'm using. And for the last two idols, I'm using noble idols with 60% faster spawn rate and chance to contain a Blight encounter, so that I don't need to use the map device to make my Blight encounter spawn in my maps, or having to use a Blight scarab to spawn them. Can free up that space. I use these two, and I've also added it here so that it's 100% chance every map I will get a Blight encounter. So let's talk about what are we farming with this Blight. How are we getting all this loot? First things first, let's start by talking about the scarabs and what exactly do they do. I'm using Blight Scarab of Blight Heart, Blight Scarab of Blooming, Blight Scarab of Invigoration, Titanic Rusted, and Horn Scarab of Bloodlines. Now, the idea behind all of these is that Blight Heart spawns a ton more enemies, giving you a lot more density. That also includes a ton more bosses, which generates even more loot, which combines really nicely with Titanic Scarab and Blight Scarab of Blooming. Gives you a ton of bosses, which if you manage to kill drops a ton of loot. We're also using a Blight Scarab of Invigoration because empowering towers, if you stack enough of them, they do make the monsters really tough to kill, and they do give them a lot of damage, but they do juice up the loot as well if you manage to kill the monsters inside these empowering towers. So essentially what we're doing is we're using a ring with an anoint for empowering tower range twice. I'm using a Calandra's Touch here. Basically I have 50% increased range of empowering towers. We're leveling up those towers to 3, and then we're killing the monsters inside them. And on top of that, I'm also using a Horn Scarab of Bloodlines because this gives a ton more density, and this is basically how we're generating so much gold from the maps and also the Blight encounters. And also they do give not just gold but other various loot as well. They're nice to have. Now let's talk about the loot you get. You get a ton of bubblegum currency with occasional divine drops, Vaulted Box drops, T0 items drops, various T1 item drops as well, which sell for like 20-30C. You get a ton of bases and a ton of scarabs and a ton of maps, which I've disabled most of the scarabs and pretty much all the bases because there's just too many of them. You don't really have enough portals to collect all the loot from them. Other than that, the biggest moneymaker is the idol drops. You get a ton of idols, and I mean a ton of idols. You get so many idols out of this per map that pretty much after every 10 maps or so, for me at least, all my 4 quad tabs are filled. I have to clean them out. So most of these items are probably not 1 divine each, right? But I'm at a point in my journey in this league that where I don't really care enough to lower down these quad tabs of divines, of idols, try and sell them for chaos orbs, like 180, 60 chaos orbs. You can definitely do that. If you pump this down, for example, to 60 chaos, you are more than likely going to get spammed for quite a lot of these. So they do sell, maybe not for one divine, but personally I would rather just 3-1 all of these that do not sell for one divine and just go on to mapping again, because you just get too much stuff. Gold gain is between 200 to 400k gold per map. I have a fully maxed out King's March with tier 10 workers all over the place. It's really just a lot of gold gain that you get per map, and you can manage to easily sustain all of these no problem at all. This strategy is an endgame strategy. If you rely on using towers still to kill the Blight monsters, this strategy might not be for you, but it's something that you can do for the endgame when you're hunting for these chase items and whatnot. Mage Blood, +1 power charge, implicit ring, etc, etc. Also, there is a strat you can do with Blight as a league starter character, or even mid-league character, where it's not as big of a loot explosion. However, it is a decent amount, and it basically revolves around target farming the blighted chest in the area by using a whole bunch of idols with faster spawn rate. 60%, you can get up to 960% faster spawn rate of mobs, which for some reason really juices up the blight chest loot that you get. I'm not sure what the interaction is there, but I mean, I'm guessing there's a lot more monsters spawning. You get a lot of stuff, but it's not guaranteed that you're gonna get a good chest type every single time. You could get a armor type or a weapon type chest, and those basically give you nothing. And with that strat, you can also use the meteor tower burning ground effect anoint on rings that will actually be able to easily clear the entire encounter without you having to actually do much. So you can do it with a pretty, I wouldn't say weak, but like a league starting character can definitely clear it. Slap down 2 or 3 meteor towers around the Blight encounter area, and they will take care of everything pretty much. And you do have to keep in mind though, when you run 960% faster spawn rate of monsters, if your towers do not kill the monsters fast enough, they will stack up and you will crash, or even the entire instance might crash and you might lose the entire map. So do be careful with those, but they are quite fun to run. And now I'm going to play a full map, how I run them, and you guys can see for yourself and decide whether this is for you or not.